Hello class, welcome to the fifth week of the course. Dr. Nemechek here again. We're going to be talking about four chapters in week 5. That can be chapters 14, 15, 16, and 17, which constitutes the next two sections of our book. Part 5 of the textbook talks about, in chapter 15, operating budget, missed one. Chapter 14, trend analysis, common sizing, and forecasting data. Chapter 15 talks about, got my book all messed up here, using comparative data. Chapter 16, which is the second part of text 6 that we're going to be looking at, construct and evaluate budgets. And in chapter 17, we're going to go into talking about capital expenditure budgets. As a future healthcare executive, you must make sure that you're fluent in budget terminology that will convey to you how, when, and where, and what you're doing. If you want to be a manager, you'll be involved with budgeting, and there's no question about that. Although the 4 chapters we're going to study this week provide you with many examples of how budgets look, how to build one, how numerous calculations can be run, remember not to lose the focus on the big picture. That is to understand why budgets are important and take it step by step from there. Don't get wrapped up in the examples, the numbers again in these chapters that lose the focus of this course. That is to become fluent in the language of healthcare finance. And looking back at what you have done in your week 4 assignments, even though some of the numbers might be different in the assignment materials that you submitted, I think that everybody's picking up on the concept that as long as you are fluent with understanding that there are basic equations that you can help to compute things like payback time for purchasing equipment, such as what you did last week. The thing that's really important is that you know that there are equations that can help you to do that. You've got to have people on staff that are able to do that in detail, because they're going to have all the appropriate numbers available to you to be able to figure out that information. But more importantly, it's good for you to understand what the terminology is that applies, and base your understanding on the concepts that you'll find in the next 4 chapters. So again, the information we'll be covering this week is Baker textbook chapters 14 through 17. I think in the syllabus it might say 15 through 18. There seems to be a disconnect in what I actually submitted and what the class says that's actually posted there. So I think you need to go with what the syllabus says, and I've told several about that before. Stick with the syllabus, and that will be the correct information that you want to find for each of the weeks that we're in. And since we're in week 5, you also need to review the week 5 PowerPoint slides, participate in week 5 discussion board, complete your week 5 assignment, which is listed in the syllabus as well, and complete your week 5 quiz. And by the way, everybody's been doing very well on those week 5 quizzes too, getting all the points that you can possibly accumulate. Again, I think that the work that you're producing and your understanding of the course so far has demonstrated that you're picking up on the information very well. Everybody's doing extremely well. Anyway, let's take a quick look at what chapter 14 talks about. That has to do with trend analysis, common sizing, and forecasting data. This chapter begins on page 149 of your textbook. And the 4 progress notes there, or your learning objectives for this chapter, are number 1, understanding you be able to use common sizing, understand and use trend analysis, understand the 5 types of forecast assumptions, and understand capacity level issues in forecasts. And as you go through this chapter, you'll see again, as we have in the past, there are many tables and graphs and exercises that you can use to try to understand exactly what they're referring to in their examples. But the bottom line in this chapter is that you have to walk away from this chapter being able to understand that as a healthcare administrator, as someone who is a healthcare executive, you have to have the ability to analyze operating data, and that's what they talk about in this particular chapter. They give you an example of what operating data looks like relative to forecasts for money that's coming in and money that's going to be going out. And they demonstrate to you how to forecast or make projections for the future and what those importance of those forecasts will be. There are a lot of different ways to graph and list out that information, but again, if you focus on understanding what the definitions are in this chapter, It will help you to understand stuff like staffing forecasts, which is one of the things that you need to become familiar with. And that's how to understand how and why it's important to staff out an organization based on the bodies that you've got available to you. So they've got some very helpful information in Chapter 14 on that. And as with all the other chapters in this text, remember, at the end of the chapter, you have a summary for what this chapter was about. You have an information checkpoint where you can ask yourself questions about what was important to know about this particular chapter, like what is needed, where is it found, how is it used. They also present you with key terms at their discussion, and then of course there are discussion questions there. And if you focus on asking yourself those questions, and you can come up with an answer without looking back in that chapter, then perhaps you have picked up on the information pretty well. If not, you have the ability to go back and look it up. Chapter 15, utilizing or using comparative data. The 5 learning objectives for this course, for this chapter, are understand the 3 criteria for true comparability, understand the 4 uses of comparative data, be able to annualize partial year expenses, apply inflation factors, and understand basic currency measures. This chapter begins on page 161. And they talk about comparability requirements, talking about the terminologies of consistency, referring to time periods, consistent methodology, inflation factors, and then how you verify that information, and they give you some explanation of monetary units of measurement. And then they talk about why you as a manager need to understand the use and why comparative data can be useful to you as a manager. Essentially what they're saying here is that you're going to be presented with all different kinds of reports by different entities within your healthcare organization, and a lot of that information is going to be financial in one way or another or related to it. And depending on how it's laid out, you actually may be able to compare those things against each other. So you want to make sure that you understand the way that they're demonstrated in Chapter 15, how to compare that data that you're being received to industry standards that exist today. And you may even want to be able to do some comparability analysis relative to what other organizations are doing. And then, of course, we have to talk about things like inflation and how we measure our currency to make sure that our money is being used in real-world dollars worth what it's worth today. So take a look again at all the information. Don't get wrapped around the exhibits and the charts and the tables. They're very helpful to just give you examples of how you compare data. But again, the bottom line is the definition. Make sure that you understand the definitions of these things. Then we move into part 6 of the textbook, which consists of the next 2 chapters, chapters 16 and 17. Chapter 16 talks about operating budgets, and the 3 learning objectives that you've got here are be able to understand the difference between operating budgets and capital expenditures, be able to understand what budget expenses will most likely be identifiable versus allocated expenses, be able to understand how to build an operating budget, and be able to understand the difference between static and flexible budgets. Again, this is a good one where understanding the concepts and the definitions that they're talking about is probably more important than all the numbers crunching and the tables and exhibits that they give you. But again, in referencing this information at the end of the chapter, page 187, the information checklist, what is needed, where is it found, how it is used, the key terms and discussion questions that apply, I think will help you to pretty much bring this whole information full circle. If you take a look again at Exhibit 16-2, a checklist for building a budget, these are the things that are important. Again, we've talked about this previously. When you're discussing a budget, these are the things that you're going to want to make sure that are included. Chapter 17, capital expenditure budgets. Make sure that you recognize the reason that a capital expenditure budget is necessary. Review the cash flow and startup cost concept. Understand differences between cash flow reporting methods. Recognize types of capital expenditure budget proposals, and understand about evaluating capital expenditure proposals. And I believe that the information that I picked out for you relative to the discussion board, the Week of 5 assignment, and the Week 5 quiz are going to hit a little bit on each of these things so you get a good flavor of what we have covered in the 4 chapters for this week. You might also notice that there are some appendices in some of the chapters in this particular week. We've got Excuse me, let me shut that phone off there. Some of the just the appendices that are included in this textbook give you further information that might be helpful in understanding the chapters. And Chapter 17 is one of those, where 17A appendix is a further discussion of capital board budgeting methods, and they give you examples of how that pertains. Next week, we will move into part 7 of the textbook, Tools to Plan, Monitor, and Control Financial Status, and we'll be covering chapters 18, 19, and 20. Again, I'd like to say how pleased I am with the basic information that you folks are producing relative to responses to the discussion board, the way that you're handling your weekly assignments, and of course the quizzes you're doing extremely well on. So at this stage of the game, where we are more than halfway through the course, I believe that all of you are doing a very good job. And those of you who have needed extra help in asking to clarify something in the assignments, or some of the information that we're working on week by week, have been doing that. And the only thing that I would ask is that I would wish that you would do that a little bit sooner in the week as opposed to later. It'd be nice to hear from you by Tuesday or Wednesday. Excuse me. The week begins on Thursday, so if I could hear from you by Sunday, that would be nice, as opposed to Tuesday or Wednesday evening, which makes it a little bit more difficult for me to get back to you in a timely manner. So anyway, keep up the good work, and if you have any questions, again, you know how to contact me, and I'll try to get back to you within 24 hours or less. And I hope you have a good week. I will see you next week with our Week 6 presentation. Thanks.